I want to ask you about this Hegseth thing, which seems to have really blown up, if you'll pardon the expression, in politically as a problem that they're trying to sort of tiptoe out of. And Hegseth spent wasn't he in the cabinet meeting this morning, which of course is televised because that's the way Trump does everything. He spoke on this, and Tony, do you have a little bit of Hegseth speaking to the Supreme Leader at the cabinet meeting? This is him sort of giving the state of the state. This might be. Is this the? Let's listen to a minute and see if this is the right cut. Here we go.
And you'll tell us about some of the achievements, and some of you have achievements that are so big I don't want you to go through the whole thing because we're not done. But we'll start with Pete, and then if you want, we'll take some questions at the end. Please, Pete.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. As you said, it has been a historic year at the Department of War. Recruiting and retention over this year are at the most historic levels our country has ever seen. I had a chance to be on an aircraft carrier destroyer over Thanksgiving. The spirit in our ranks since the election under President Trump is unprecedented. I've never seen anything like it as a soldier myself in uniform, and I know a lot of you feel the same way. We've ripped out the DEI and the political correctness. It's all merit-based at the department. We're getting back to basics: accountability, training, readiness, lethality, and that's reviving that spirit. And Mr. President, we're rebuilding the military, historic investments. I just took briefings on the Golden Dome and F-47, next generation capabilities that are going to make sure that for generations to come, America has the most powerful, most capable, most lethal military in the world, which you have rebuilt
I've
once
seen enough.
and
First of all, you want to talk about a waste of money. That F-47 or that and the Golden Dome, David. These are Pentagon programs that are just monuments to waste. And then he just speaks lethality. He uses words like that, and it's just I find it all performative. But to the point, Hegseth's in trouble, isn't he?
Hegseth is in a great deal of trouble, and I find it hard to believe, though I do not have any specific facts, that troop morale is at the highest levels ever. And part of the reason is one of the things going on very clearly since the Washington Post broke the story, and the White House confirmed the story, however surprising that is, that Pete Hegseth issued the order, kill them all. And they went back to the two survivors of the first boat strike, we've just learned, and killed them. You rescue people when you shoot. If you had an enemy, and Venezuela is not our enemy, and you shoot their boat out, you go rescue the people who are in the water, and then you take them as prisoners of war. You don't kill them. And they're trying to now lay all the blame for this on an admiral. That's not going to go down well with the boys in uniform. That's not being stand up. And our military is certainly taught, especially at the officer corps level, about being stand up. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't things that go wrong. There are junior officers, who get court-martialed or pushed out of the service because of some effort to protect somebody further up the ranks. That happens. It shouldn't happen. But this is of a whole different order. This is civilians undertaking actions that are clearly illegal and then trying to lay it off on an officer who's the intermediary. And it goes to the heart of the recommendation by Mark Kelly, who may well be the next president of the United States, thanks to all of this, that you do not just follow orders. Hegseth was a captain. I mean, it's not a high rank, lieutenant captain, but he was a captain, and that he doesn't grasp this or he doesn't care, which I think is the much more likely explanation. It doesn't logically flow from that the troops would be thrilled. And that's what he's trying to sell.
By the way, just as an aside, I made the point to start the show that Mark Kelly should send Donald Trump a Christmas gift and thank you note for the making him the target. Making him the target of DOJ and Pentagon is a horrible thing. Don't get me wrong, but I mean, you're right. His political profile has been raised on a level that it just could not happen overnight any other way.
And Mark, should the Justice Department charge Kelly and the other 5 Democrats? I think that will really blow up in their face because of two things. One is what they did in that public service announcement that I'm assuming everybody watching has seen is simply state the law as it is and as is taught to every military officer and indeed civilian officers. And secondly, it's hard to imagine that any court would uphold this because it's not a crime. Oh, and there's a third reason. There's what's called the speech and debate clause in the Constitution. You know, a member of Congress can walk onto the floor and say any outrageous thing in the world, and they may not be held accountable for it anywhere else. Kind of like the Supreme Court giving Donald a free pass in 2023 by saying a president cannot, after he leaves office, be prosecuted for any official act, which is totally contradictory to the Constitution, makes it eminently clear if you are impeached and convicted, you can still be criminally prosecuted.
This is something that we asked ourselves about, and we kind of speculated about. But when we talk about a war crime, we were saying before, that's something that is, that could be adjudicated at the Hague court, et cetera. But it's not something it's not a pardonable offense in the sense of these other pardonable offenses that we've heard so much about.
Well, the U.S. is not a signatory to the International Criminal Court. That's probably the most important aspect of this. There was actually a very good West Wing episode about this very issue involving Leo McGarry, the fictional vice president who had been a combat pilot in Vietnam. But under American law, I think there's a very clear civilian charge of murder here. With malice aforethought, bad intention, you meant to do a bad act, that's malice aforethought, and mens rea, criminal intent, so clearly apply if in fact Hegseth said, as we now know he did, kill them all. And why would you say kill them all? Well, the only reason you would do that is to make sure that there are no witnesses who can challenge your claim that this was a boat full of drugs. And by the way, if you go back and look carefully at the images from above, just before that first boat is hit. Now, I'm not an expert in imaging science, but it sure looks to me like a fishing boat. It's more an open sort of boat of the kind you can see people in various places around the world go out and fish in. And of course, that's the claim by some of the families who lost their sons, husbands, whomever on the boats, that they were out fishing at night.
Yeah. The sort of shallow nature of these shallow boats, it seemed to back up fishing.
And which certainly couldn't go 1,000 miles to reach the United States. By the way, according to the Drug Enforcement Administration, that is, according to Donald Trump's own administration, the share of fentanyl and fentanyl precursors being smuggled into the United States from Venezuela, zero. And total drugs brought into the United States illicitly, less than 1% from Venezuela. So while I always dislike the argument that, well, we're really inherently dislike the argument, we're really doing this for the oil. Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world. And given Trump's affinity for burning fossil fuels, in his case, you need to deeply wonder. Somebody said, we need to grab the oil. Because remember, Trump said in the Middle East, we should grab the oil.
Well, it's also worth noting, if they're so serious about this war on drugs, why pardon this president of, is it Honduras?
It's Honduras.
Yeah.
My late sister-in-law was an American diplomat. Her last post was Honduras. So she lived there for many years. We've been to Honduras a number of times. She died a number of years ago now. But the level of corruption in Honduras is off the chart. While we were there once, one of the local newspapers ran a huge double truck map on the inside. That's double truck has 2 pages facing each other with Tegucigalpa and marking which gangs were in which territories and telling about their particular criminal interests. And while we were there, there was a bus driver who had been robbed repeatedly by one of the gangs, and he told him, I don't have any more money. So they just in front of all the passengers killed him. We paid for a guy with a shotgun who stood in a booth 24 hours a day, different people, different shifts, but 24 hours a day. There was a guy with a shotgun on the street where my sister-in-law's hacienda was located. And this is a society where, why did we suddenly have a few years ago all of these people coming, notably mothers with daughters who went all the way from Honduras to the Mexican border, which is well over 1,000 miles, because we stopped putting financial aid into Honduras at the insistence of Donald Trump. And this made the criminal gangs much more powerful. And they began impressing 10, 12-year-old girls as soon as they began to get a figure into prostitution, impressing young men into becoming gang members. One of the three people who were on the personal staff of my sister-in-law to take care of her, which is very common in a country like that because very inexpensive to do, he got into some row with one of the gangs, and he committed suicide because he left a note saying that he knew that they would torture him to death in the most cruel ways possible, and they were going to get him. So he killed himself.
Wow.
Over something stupid, frankly, in the beginning of it. So this is the most dangerous city in the Western Hemisphere, Tegucigalpa.
Well, to this point, I mean, that this is, and that's such a disturbing story, but I'm glad that you described it, because it's not just narcotics trafficking, it's all of that stuff you're talking about. It's
right.
It's a real gruesome, brutal, ruthless gang that controls all of this. And so this, again, this Juan Orlando Hernandez, he's the Honduran president. He was just released from a U.S. federal prison. It just happened today because, and you know, a lot of very capable and hardworking narcotics officers, DEA agents, and Justice Department lawyers actually prosecuted a case against this guy, and they charged him and convicted him of running this narco state and smuggling hundreds of tons of cocaine into the U.S.
400 tons, 400 tons, according to the indictment. Think about that. That's 400 times 2,000. And cocaine is sold by the gram, and there's 28 grams to an ounce. I mean, we're talking about an enormous amount of drugs. And Donald goes, oh, he was so unfairly prosecuted. I mean, they didn't have any case against him, you know. They just said because he's the head of a... Holy mackerel. This is...
He got 45 years. I mean, it had to be...
He was lucky he didn't get life.
And so he's back out. And this, again, is of a type. This administration is doing this, and they did it last month with the Silk Road guy, and they do it with, I mean, these are people who are drenched in lawlessness and crime, and some of them are just really, as we've suggested, associated with narcotics and child trafficking. That's a Silk Road and an underworld, if you will. I don't get it aside from the money part, David. Is it just all about the money?
Mark, what is wrong with you? How do you not recognize that Mark Kelly is the criminal and that these drug traffickers are really poor, misunderstood people who the system has wrongly charged with crimes? You know, we really need to deal with the serious criminals and their speech, because that's what's threatening MAGA and threatening America and real patriots.
Play me the Mark Kelly thing, will you, Tony, please? Mark Kelly speaking, and he's again had this profile elevated as a result of the Trump charges. First, this is a bit of a supercut on him. Go ahead.
In 1991, when Donald Trump was driving the Taj Mahal casino into bankruptcy, I was getting shot at over Iraq and Kuwait. In 2001, after Donald Trump said that the collapse of the Twin Towers meant he now owned the tallest skyscraper in Manhattan, I was carrying flags honoring 9/11 victims into space on a rocket ship. In 2003, when Donald Trump was writing birthday greetings to the monster Jeffrey Epstein, I was the first on the scene to recover the bodies of my fellow astronauts who died when Space Shuttle Columbia exploded during re-entry. In 2011, when Trump was hosting a reality show and peddling conspiracy theories against President Barack Obama, I was sitting next to my wife's hospital bed as she recovered from a gunshot wound to the head. My point is this: I've been through a lot worse in service to my country. The President and Pete Hegseth are not going to silence me. They aren't going to keep me from speaking out, and they're not going to keep me from doing my job. Enough of the bullying, enough of the intimidation, enough of the threats, enough of your nonsense. Doesn't help anyone in our country afford their groceries or pay their medical bills. And it erodes the rights of every American. My job is to fight for them, to stand up for the Constitution, and nothing is going to stop me from doing my job.
So he's speaking both righteously as an aggrieved, targeted party, but also
Sure.
you see him beginning a rise politically, I think, in a way he'd never dreamt of, perhaps.
Yeah, I'm in this odd position of covering politics when I spent my whole career covering policy and avoiding politics. Did one campaign in 1976, and that was for governor of Nevada for the LA Times, and that is not what I want to do. But I think at this point, it's pretty clear that either Gavin Newsom or Mark Kelly, maybe J.B. Pritzker, are the most likely candidates the Democratic Party will put up in the next round. And that's assuming that we do have elections, and I think we will, but it's not a guarantee anymore. As in the past, you could think the next election is equal in likelihood to the sun appearing to rise in the east in the morning. In the West, we got a whole bigger problem. But yes, he's clearly testing out and feeling out a position here. And Trump's mental deterioration is clear and worsening. You got to work hard not to recognize there's a problem here. His striking out at people for asking questions, which is beneath the dignity, not just of the presidency of the United States, but the mayor of Smallville.
Sure.
And Kelly, not a physically attractive man by any stretch of the imagination, and relatively small. Astronauts usually are pretty small guys. He knows command presence, and that is something we know is appealing to voters. I'm sure he's seriously thinking now about running for the White House and finding out what kind of financial support he can raise. And of course, that goes to one of the tragedies of American life, which is that we have created this system where only those who are acceptable to the big campaign donors will even appear on the ballot in either party. So among the many duties that I believe, have as citizens, if and when we get through this, is some serious reworking of policies and things like publicly financed elections. And by the way, let me just make my pitch for that. The advantage of a publicly financed election and barring corporate money 100% from elections is you get a budget and we get to see how you handle the taxpayers' money. Are you a spendthrift? Are you prudent? Can you brag at the end, hey, I won the presidency and I'm giving the government back $5 million of that, whatever huge number was handed out. I mean, there are all sorts of things we could do to make the system less dependent on the interests of very wealthy people. That, by the way, everybody who's wealthy is not of a similar mind any more than everybody who's a carpenter is of a similar mind. We need to keep that in mind. Historically, Wall Street was more with Democrats than Republicans, for example. But these are really important issues. And by the way, Pete Hegseth should be very worried that after this administration is gone, he's going to be indicted. And because the charge will be murder, there is no statute of limitations, unlike many other crimes.
Well, more on Hegseth in a second. I just wanted to put a sharp point on what you are saying about elections. It's the saddest fact of America and American politics the system is drenched in money, and there are interests on all sides that
Yeah.
benefit from it being drenched in money. There are
Yeah.
corporate interests that are served, there are private interests that are served, there are personal interests that are served along the way. So that's a huge mountain to climb. And of course, the Supreme Court made it so possible now with Citizens United and other court cases like it. I want to get now to Hegseth just for a second, because let me just go first to your point about murder. Now, is there any way that Trump could intervene there and make certain...
He can
Yeah,
pardon
a
Hegseth,
pardon,
and I
right.
fully expect that he will.
Right.
If he does that, here's the problem he's going to run into. There will then be enormous pressure to turn Hegseth over for a trial in The Hague, even though we are not parties to that convention. The Venezuelans will absolutely be demanding turning him over. And, a new regime, if we in fact invade and throw Maduro out, may well find it in its interest to show the independence of the Venezuelan people. So I don't think this is a safe place for him at all. And I'm not one bit worried about him. If you're going to do things like this, you should be held accountable. And that's a word we really need to get back into. I've talked about the word regard. We need to have a lot more regard for others, but we also need to have accountability. And one of the things I taught my law students when I was teaching the law of the ancient world was in the ancient world, accountability was often incredibly strict accountability, which is a technical legal term. So much so that in many cases, the penalty for not being properly accountable for misconduct, we killed you. At least that was what the law said, whether we carried it out or not. And we're seeing an administration here that wants no accountability whatsoever. And notice how often when Donald is confronted with something, his response to something he's done that's just beyond the pale is, I don't know anything about that.
Yeah. No,
and then he'll say something within a minute that makes it clear he knows all about that.
Yeah, his default position is, I know nothing about that. Right.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about that.
Sergeant Schultz on
Yeah.
whatever that Bob Crane show was.
Yeah, Hogan's
Prisoners of
Heroes,
War.
was that it? Yeah.
I know
yeah.
nothing.
No. So now to Russia and Ukraine, if you would. The plan that was handed down, it seems at best coached by Russia, the 28 provisions as part of this plan. At worst, it was more than coached by Russia. It was crafted by Russia. And then Witkoff, I'd suggest, who is a billionaire golfing buddy of Trump, who's handled all these negotiations in the Middle East and in Russia, Ukraine, has tremendous business interests in Russia. A lot of his capital for building that billionaire estate that he presides over comes from Russia. So the idea somehow that guy is squiring this Ukraine-Russia thing to a peace, it's absurd.
Well, I think what's going on here is very clear. The Russians, first of all, are absolutely behind this 28-point plan. And you can get in the details, say, well, some of it's from their stuff. You're missing the big picture if that's where you go. The Russians were behind this. Steve Witkoff coached the Russian emissaries on here's how to deal with Donald. Here's how to appeal to him. I could run a class on that.
Sure.
Every time I ever negotiated with Donald, I came away better off than I thought I would be, because basically you just have to know how to flatter him the right way. And when he first sort of tests that, you have to continue down that road. And then he kind of collapses because he's so desperate inside for approval. But this is the way this is being sold to Trump, I think is very clear at this point. It's a commercial transaction. There's money to be made. And that's because words like honor have no meaning to Donald. I mean, he'll say things now and then, but honor is a concept that's alien to who he is. It's not in his nature, it's not in his upbringing, and it's absolutely not in his conduct all the way back as far as I know about it, which includes things when he was a boy. So the thrust of this plan is, hey, we're going to make a lot of money. All we have to do is get the Ukrainians to give up the territory Russia has, plus a whole lot of other territory they haven't been able to get. And then we're going to make a lot of money. And of course, all that makes an assumption that you can trust Putin. Anybody at this point who thinks that Putin's word is worth a nickel, a plug nickel, is a fool. It's utterly worthless. And I've said on this show a number of times, and I've seen some people criticize me for saying this, that Putin really intends to conquer other countries. Well, look what he's doing right now. Drone overflights of NATO countries, fighter jets intercepting NATO country aircraft, various forms of harassment. He absolutely is going to go through with what he himself has said through this entire century and in the very last year or two of the previous millennium, that he intends to do. And in that case, his conduct says we should take him at his word. He intends, and his successors support the idea that a mother Russia, a greater Russia should be there, that Ukraine is not a country. The old Soviet used to refer to Ukraine as the Ukraine as a way to diminish it and suggest it's just a part of Russia. And of course, the historical record suggests the exact opposite. If there's a mother country, it's Ukraine.
The latest is, and this just happened today, Zelensky is now going to Europe in the shadow of this, proposed agreement, which is kind of a surrender agreement, as you, I think, made the point last time we spoke. Yeah. And the Europeans, they're blanching from this as well, this agreement that's proposed for the reasons that you've just suggested also, the expansion of Russia and how it's a crappy deal. The Americans, in other words, are now, it would seem, in league with the Russians. I'm sure this is the general European posture. And the Europeans could push back in many different ways, couldn't they, David?
They absolutely could. And in a perverse way, you got to admire the skill of the Kremlin in manipulating this situation. I mean, you really do. It is astonishing that we are at this point. The best thing that could happen right now is for the European Union countries to agree that they're going to turn over to Ukraine all of the seized assets of Russia. That is it doesn't involve any lethal force. It provides Ukraine with money to buy more weapons and to buy things it chooses to buy. It will enrage to no end Putin, and he may do something adventuresome and dangerous, but the whole situation is adventuresome and dangerous. And this continued, let's just take baby steps. Let's do the minimum we need to respond. It hasn't worked. I don't see why or how it would work. And so the Europeans need to step up because they're the first line area that's going to be in trouble. I mean, imagine if Putin or his successor is successful. We'll go forward 20 years. He's rebuilt his military. The Iron Curtain is now back, basically. That's going to be just god-awful for Europeans for as long as that exists. And we managed to bring down the Soviet Union without any direct warfare. There were proxy wars like Vietnam, but no direct warfare, no nuclear holocaust, because we were smart about it. And unfortunately, we have an idiot in the White House. And I mean that in both meanings of idiot. The classic meaning from ancient Greece that you don't care about anyone but yourself, which is the definition of being Donald Trump. And also the sense, in the modern sense, of you don't know anything. The Europeans got plenty of sophisticated, smart people here, and they should be figuring out how to ratchet up. They should be getting tougher on the sanctions on Russia because it's a one-note economy. And we know they can now get by without much Russian oil and gas, and probably after this winter can go whole hog and just cut them off completely.
They have options to push back against America, or do you think they're loath to do that?
That's a really good question. Do you want to drive more of a wedge with Donald Trump when NATO has been the most important organization in the world in preventing the kind of violence that has swept Europe again and again and again for hundreds of years? That's a more subtle question. I haven't given a lot of thought to that, but you want to keep the United States in your corner. Keeping Trump is mostly a function of who talked to Donald last, and 5 minutes later he may change. I mean, the underlying basic problem is that we have a mentally ill, appallingly ignorant man in the White House. who has these desperate emotional needs from his awful, awful upbringing. Be glad you were not brought up in that household. And the Europeans have to figure out how to navigate this. If J.D. Vance were in the White House, which may well happen before this term is out, he's probably a much more malleable individual because there's no indication he has any particular principles.
Right.
And he's basically an opportunist. Well, opportunists you can deal with. You have to understand the opportunities that will motivate them, and you can manipulate them.
Finally, I want to just go quickly to this National Guard situation. This happened since we spoke to you last, so I wanted to get your take on it. The National Guard troops in Washington that I think shouldn't be there to begin with, of course, but they are. And they had opened fire on two of them, and as it turns out, it was an Afghani who had just been granted asylum and gained asylum in April during the Trump administration vetting process that presumably would have been on top of whatever vetting went on during the Biden administration. But to the point, he'd been heavily vetted by the CIA, worked with the CIA for some time. So this guy was, it seemed, vetted quite extensively. So more to the point, he had lost his work permit, David. That is to say, it had expired. And so he'd found himself with 5 kids at home in a sort of desperate situation, not so unlike many Americans find themselves as the economy continues not to serve them. And I don't know to what extent, but I'm guessing more than a little bit, in desperation, frustration, and anger, maybe it was a contributing factor in what happened. I wonder if you can give me a moment on all of this.
Well, first, let me step back to the Trump administration. How is the Trump administration like the dictatorship in North Korea and the dictatorship of the Taliban in Kabul? One person does something and we now punish everybody. We have corruption of blood that's in our Constitution, that phrase, corruption of blood, in North Korea. So there are people who are in effectively prisons in North Korea today because of something their great-grandfather did in 1949. And Trump says, oh, well, this person did this, so no Afghanis can come in the country, and we're going to return these people to Afghanistan. Well, God help us if we ever need to get somebody in another country to help us against a force like the Taliban, because you'd be an idiot to sign up for it unless you are confident that we've completely purged ourselves of Trumpism and the thinking of Trumpism. Secondly, the vetting here is the responsibility of the Trump administration and all their efforts to lay this on Biden. I don't know whether they'll go with the public or not, but they're the ones who approved. Third, we shouldn't be surprised that some people who we put to work basically as assassins. I mean, in his case, he wasn't pulling the trigger. He was picking the targets and saying, yes, that target, and here's the rationale for why, and persuading military lawyers, because this is a combat zone, that you can kill these people. That somebody like that may not, in the long run, be terribly mentally stable. I mean, when I was a boy growing up in California in the 50s and in the early 60s, I remember men, fathers of kids I knew who were just mean and nasty and would explode out of nowhere. And as a kid, I didn't understand it, but I now know it's because every single one of them I knew served in World War II, mostly in the Pacific, where they were in combat. And it messed them up. Finally, the system that we have for when we bring people here, and there are about 250,000 more Afghanis who we promised we would take care of, and we're not, waiting to get into this country. And Trump's just basically said, no, that's not going to happen.
And just to make that point, David, they helped the Americans at great personal peril.
Oh,
I mean, if
absolutely. The Taliban killed a whole lot of people. And not only will they kill this man if he's sent back, but they'll kill his children. We have every reason to think that they will do that because they've done it in other cases. And so the system we have, and I fault Congress and the Democrats as well as Donald Trump and the Republicans on this one, we haven't set up a logical, thoughtful system. Ronald Reagan, looked at the immigration situation. He was from his 20s, a Los Angelino, and as governor of California, came to recognize that, we depend for California agriculture and some other things, but agriculture primarily, on all of these workers who come from Mexico. And we have to come up with some logical system. And we have to recognize that a lot of people have come here with or without permission, or they have historical reasons for being here. And we've got to address this. And we did. We had what amounted to, for all practical purposes, an amnesty. And we resolved that. And there are people who came here from Mexico without permission when I was born, whose children now are, retired, successful surgeons, business owners, restaurant owners, school teachers, police officers. And we're not doing that today. We're just demonizing people from somewhere else. So, the core underlying problem has to do with our inability to find some kind of sensible policy to deal with immigration and people coming across borders, and going around and arresting, mothers who go to school to pick up their kids, or people who show up for a court hearing because they're compliant with the law, and dragging them away while their kids cry and scream, leaving a baby in the back seat of a car, which can be a prosecutable offense, is not the answer to this. And we're seeing more and more Americans recognizing, no, this is not the way to run a railroad.
Yeah, boy, very well put. Look, I'm way out of time, but real quick, Trump just announced, this is a pivot to this story I just wanted to get to, this Trump account, which he has floated now, which would be literally a way in which Americans could become millionaires by the time they're 28. It suggested essentially that you can fund this personally up to $5,000. The government will, if you're under 18, contribute $1,000, and your employer can contribute $2,500 annually. Okay, so the idea is this pot of gold that you feed into will ride the stock market, and by the time you're 28, based on these projections, you could be sitting on $1 million. Now, again, this is on the White House website, Trump accounts, they call it, giving the next generation a chance to save. You can see it there. Tony's got it on the screen for you.
Yeah.
It strikes me as full of illegalities. I just don't know how you can compel employers to feed this fund, how you can just create this fund overnight. But then again, I didn't think DOGE would be able to dismantle the American government overnight. So tell me, David, what are the realities?
Yeah, Trump doesn't have any legal authority to do this, number one, and he's going to be challenged in court about it, number two. He, however, is going to get a lot of popular support among this, especially among the poorly educated. The underlying problem that Trump is addressing here is grossly inadequate incomes. If the minimum wage had kept pace with productivity, that is the value added by workers in the economy, instead of being $7.25 an hour since 2009, and by the way, if you're a wait staff person, a waiter, a bartender, a busboy, etc., it's $2.13 an hour, frozen since 1993, thanks to Bill Clinton. The minimum wage should be about $26 an hour. And if you raised it to $26 an hour, which is more than $1,000 a week, you would see everybody who is below executive pay, everybody up to probably $200,000 a year getting a pay raise. And you say, well, how would we afford that? Well, you need some time to adjust, but the Europeans afford that. McDonald's workers in Denmark famously get about $22 an hour plus healthcare, plus education benefits, et cetera, pension, et cetera, et cetera. And their McDonald's burgers don't cost hardly any different than what's here in America. It's what happens is you're not going to have $1 billion a year, or in the case of Elon Musk, $1 trillion or $500 billion CEOs. That's what would be the difference. So this is going to resonate with people who simply don't have enough money. And the RAND study, which I've mentioned before, and I hope you put on your page, from 73 to 2018, if we had kept the income distribution of 1973, the peak year for private sector union membership, the average income of the bottom 99%, so that's up to roughly $600,000 a year, and that year about $500,000, would have been 2/3 higher. If you make $100,000, you would have made $167,000. Think how much better off you would be if you had an extra 2/3 on your paycheck. It would eliminate a lot of the social pathologies, a lot of the anger that we're seeing that's driving violence in this country, and appeal for Donald Trump. And all of this is Congress acting to suppress the wages of ordinary people. And never forget this, in his first campaign, and at least once in the second round of Donald Trump, he has said the problem is wages are too high.
Wow.
If you're a Trump believer and you think he's your friend, Donald says wages are too high. You could put together a bunch of clips for a supercut of him saying that. And it's not the problem. The problem is that too few have too much and too many have not enough.
Sure. And you just outlined the fact that the real way to build wealth would have been to, as you suggest, keep wages growing. And you'd have a
But
robust
this will allow
middle class.
Trump and the Republicans to say, see, the Democrats don't want you to be wealthy. They want to hold you down. No, that's not what's going on at all. By the way, if you also really want to increase wealth, there are two other things you can do. Break up the big monopolies so that we have competitive market capitalism. My trilogy on the American economy it champions competitive market capitalism because I believe so far it's the best idea human beings have come up with. Somebody may come up with a better idea in the future. Great if that happens. But the essential word is competitive. We have corporate socialism. We don't have competitive market capitalism. And the second would be universal no out-of-pocket health care. I was listening to Jen White on NPR's 1A today, and she had these very erudite experts about our healthcare system and its economics. And they kept going with the existing assumption that your ability to get health care should be tied to your working. Why? Is your ability to drive down the road tied to that? As I ask my students every year, at some point, I find a way to bring up. So I got a question for you. How many of the vendors I see today, we're having a job fair and some other things on campus, and banks are here. And so how many of you were solicited for kindergarten insurance? They look at me like I'm crazy, and I go, you weren't solicited for, college students are known to engage in behaviors that create a need for kindergarten. Are you sure you weren't solicited for kindergarten? Oh, I forgot. We provide that at no charge to you personally because it's good for society to have kindergarten. Well, why do we treat healthcare differently than kindergarten?
Well, it's also a double penalty. If you lose your job, you lose your benefits, you lose your health care. It's a brutal, I think, withering weight on people.
And they had a doctor on today who said he'd had patients who had a treatable stage 1 cancer. They could have been cured and lived the rest of their life, or they needed a surgery that was scheduled and they lost their insurance. And he had to tell them, I'm sorry, you're going to die. He didn't say it as bluntly as I did, but it was clear that was the message. You don't have $98,000, you're going to die. This is inhumane. It's illogical. And the Constitution as written does not create a right to health care. How could it have? We didn't have medically based, scientifically based health care until the last century, the 1900s. That doesn't mean we can't, to promote the general welfare, have a universal health care system, which every other modern country has. Mexico has universal health care. That is
Thank you. I was going to say, and it's also, we're the exception in the world, in the developed world.
Yeah, it is just absolutely bizarre, and it's cruel. And, as an editor when I was at the New York Times, said to me in much more coded language, I will never get health care. And that's because it would go not just to white people. And, as a practical matter, I think he's right about that. Racism is at the core of that. But if we had universal no out-of-pocket health care, we would turn fewer taxpayers into tax eaters because they become disabled and can't work. We would eliminate for small business owners their worries about the health status of their workers. Large companies would pay no more than they pay now because they pay through the tax system, and we would save an amount of money that in some years equals all the income taxes paid by everybody, and in most years, all the income taxes paid by 99% and a little bit of the top 1% of the public. As soon as I get through this semester and grading papers, because I'm carrying a much heavier load than usual, I will post a piece with the numbers on this, because I've gathered the numbers. I just haven't had time to write them.
Well, I'll look forward to that. I always feel, and I think I made this point to you before, that the insurance companies are the middlemen that you just don't need. And problem with the ACA or the Obamacare was that sadly, the insurance companies had an oversized place at the table, and they continue to benefit. I get it. There's a market,
and it was
know.
all Obama could get through Congress, and
Exactly.
It's deeply flawed. And I wish he had the political strength to do more, but. Right now you're seeing the clear goal. Congressman Alan Grayson, a rather obnoxious character I know a little bit from Florida, said on the floor of the House maybe 20 years ago now, the Republican health care plan is very simple. If you get sick, die soon. And he was censured for that. But you know what? He spoke the God's truth.
Yeah, ain't it true? Wow, an overstuffed feast of a conversation with David Cay Johnston. Thank you, David. We'll talk next
Take care,
week.
Mark.
All right, my friend. David Cay Johnston, everybody. Right on.
The Mark Thompson Show.
It was great. I loved it.
How would you handle this? We could try ignoring it, sir.
Morning.
You cannot say you love your country.
Where are my weed smokers at? Stay at home and get baked.
Right on. Thank you for being here. Please smash the like button. That's the thing. Costs you nothing to smash
it with your iron
do
rod.
it like a boss. And subscribe to the show and hit the notification bell. We had some great interviews drop over the long weekend, the Thanksgiving weekend, and I got a lot of great emails and comments about them. And you'll know whenever special interviews drop when you hit that notification bell. So there is all of that. Now, I am looking ahead in the hymnal and seeing that I have a few stories that I wanted to share with the boys and girls, Kim. I don't know if I should go to your news, knowing that they are integrated into said news, or if I should do them separately. I turn to you as my light in the night to share your opinions, and so I ask you what to do, Kim.
Kim, how are you?
Let's do a quick news, because it's not that long.
Quick news as we continue. Mark Thompson. No. Just a quick, thank you very much.
Mark Thompson Show.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.